Human follows screams and finds alien girl burned by tribal aliens. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Commander Jake Miller had been wandering the dense, icy forests of the distant planet Vexor, his breath visible in the cold air. The night had fallen thick and silent around him, with the wind whispering through the trees like a warning. He had been separated from his squad during an intense skirmish, and now, alone, he tried to make his way back to the safety of his base. He adjusted his heavy gear, feeling the weight of exhaustion in his muscles, the cold seeping through his armor. The silence of the forest was unnerving. Suddenly, a sharp, desperate scream pierced the stillness of the night. It echoed through the trees, a cry for help, filled with terror. Jake froze, his heart racing as he instinctively grabbed his rifle. The scream came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of something crashing through the underbrush. Without hesitation, Jake followed the sounds, pushing through the thick branches and uneven terrain. The scream led him deeper into the woods, where the air grew colder and the shadows stretched longer. As he navigated through the dense forest, the cold biting into his skin, Jake could hear the scream growing more frantic. His instincts kicked in, adrenaline sharpening his senses. He knew this wasn't some animal in distress. This was something, or someone, in real danger. He had to help. After what seemed like an eternity, Jake finally broke through a thicket of trees and found himself in a clearing. There, lying on the cold ground, was an alien girl. Her skin was a soft, pale turquoise, and her long hair shimmered with an iridescent glow, but it was the horrific sight of her charred body that made his stomach turn. She had been burned badly, cruel, red marks all over her delicate frame. The source of the scream had been her, and the cause of her torment was painfully clear. Tribal aliens had attacked her, leaving her to suffer alone in the cold, surrounded by the dense forest. She looked up at Jake with wide, pain-filled eyes, her breathing ragged as she struggled to sit up. Jake knelt beside her, his hand reaching out instinctively to offer her comfort, though he wasn't sure how much help he could be. She was on the brink of death, and the odds were stacked against her. He quickly assessed her condition: burns, cuts, and bruises that spoke of a long and violent struggle. Despite the gravity of the situation, something about her gaze struck him. There was a glimmer of life, of defiance, in her eyes. Even in this state, she hadn't given up. Jake's heart went out to her. He couldn't just leave her like this. With a sense of urgency, he pulled out his medical kit, quickly working to stabilize her condition as best as he could. Her breathing slowed as he applied the healing ointments, but he knew it was only a temporary solution. He had to get her back to base, to real medical help, but that would mean crossing miles of harsh terrain, and that wasn't going to be easy. Still, Jake couldn't leave her. The forest around them seemed to grow darker, the wind picking up as if it was warning him, but he ignored it. The alien girl, her face pale but determined, gave him a look of silent gratitude before closing her eyes, exhausted from the pain and the trauma. Jake lifted her carefully, his muscles protesting as he stood, her fragile body supported in his arms. He was her only hope now. As he began to make his way back through the forest, every step felt like a battle. He had to keep moving. There was no time to lose. He would protect her, no matter the cost. The cold air bit at Jake's skin as he moved through the dense forest, his mind racing. Every step he took was calculated, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the alien girl in his arms. Lyra. He had learned her name in the moments before she had passed out, her voice a faint whisper of gratitude. She was so fragile, so unlike the warriors he had encountered on this planet. The weight of her body in his arms reminded him of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. He couldn't let her down. The forest around him seemed endless, the trees towering above like silent sentinels, casting shadows that only made the journey feel longer. The wind howled through the branches, carrying the chill of the planet's unforgiving atmosphere. But it wasn't just the cold that gnawed at Jake's mind. It was the sense of urgency. Every second mattered. He had to get Lyra back to base, to safety, to medical attention. He knew this planet like the back of his hand. He had been here on multiple missions, but navigating the terrain with an injured, unconscious alien girl in his arms was an entirely different challenge. The path ahead was treacherous, the ground uneven and slippery with patches of frozen mud. Jake was no stranger to hard travel, but the weight of his companion made each step feel heavier. His breath came in quick, steady bursts, his body pushing through the exhaustion as he fought to stay focused. His mind kept drifting back to her, a girl from another world, someone who had been so brutally harmed by the very beings who called this planet home. He didn't know her past, her story, but it didn't matter. She was now his responsibility, and he wasn't going to let her fall through the cracks. The sound of Lyra's breathing, soft but steady, offered him a small comfort as he made his way forward. He had no illusions about how dire her condition was. She was burned, scarred, and broken. The tribal aliens that had attacked her had left their mark, both physically and emotionally. But there was something in her eyes when she had looked at him, something fierce, something that told him she wasn't ready to give up. Jake's resolve hardened. He couldn't afford to fail her. As the minutes turned to hours, Jake's body began to protest. The cold seeped into his bones, his legs screaming for a break, but he didn't stop. Every time he looked down at Lyra, her face pale and bruised, he pushed on. They had to make it. He had to make it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the familiar outline of the base came into view. The large steel structure stood like a beacon in the distance, a sign that they were nearly there. Jake's heart began to race, his pace quickening as he moved toward the gates. The security guards at the entrance spotted him immediately, their eyes widening in surprise as they rushed forward. "Commander Miller, what happened?" "Who is she?" one of them asked, his voice tinged with confusion and concern. Jake didn't have the energy for explanations. "Get medical help now," he ordered, his voice tight with urgency. The guards moved quickly, rushing to open the gates and signaling for the medical team. As they made their way inside, Jake could feel his own strength starting to falter. The adrenaline that had pushed him this far was beginning to ebb away, but he couldn't afford to stop now. Lyra's life was still hanging in the balance. The medics arrived in moments, taking Lyra from his arms with practiced efficiency. Jake barely had time to step back before they whisked her away, disappearing into the sterile, brightly lit halls of the medical bay. He stood there, breathing heavily, his body finally giving in to the exhaustion. But his mind was elsewhere, still with Lyra, still with the alien girl who had screamed in the woods, and who had found her way into his heart. What had happened to her? Who had done this to her? And most importantly, how could he help her now that he had saved her life? The questions swirled in his head, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Jake allowed himself a moment of relief. She was safe, for now. The sterile white walls of the medical bay felt both comforting and suffocating to Jake as he stood there, waiting. The soft hum of machines was the only sound breaking the silence, and he could feel the weight of the moments passing, each one heavier than the last. The medics had taken Lyra into one of the private rooms immediately, their expressions serious as they worked to stabilize her. Jake's mind raced with questions about Lyra, about her attackers, about the planet they were on. He had never been the type to sit idly by, but there was nothing more he could do right now except wait. The pain in his legs was becoming more pronounced, a dull ache that seemed to spread with every passing minute. He hadn't realized how much of his strength he had used up during the trek through the forest, carrying Lyra through the cold, treacherous terrain. But the thought of her, lying unconscious and vulnerable, kept him on edge. He couldn't shake the image of her bruised face, the terror in her eyes before she had passed out. Was it the trauma from the attack, or had she been through something worse before? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a door sliding open. A tall figure stepped into the room, her presence commanding yet calm. It was Dr. Harper, the base's chief medical officer. Her expression was unreadable as she approached Jake, but her eyes softened slightly when she saw him standing there, his exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "Commander Miller," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of concern. "How is she?" Jake asked immediately, his voice tight. "We've stabilized her for now," Dr. Harper replied, her eyes flicking to the data pad in her hand. "But her condition is still critical. She's been severely burned, and there's significant trauma to her internal organs." We're doing what we can, but, she trailed off, her words hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. Jake nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation. I know you're doing everything you can, he said quietly. But, what about the tribal aliens? Do we know who they are? Why they attacked her? Dr. Harper sighed, setting the data pad down on the counter. We don't have much information on the tribal aliens here. They're not from any of the known factions we've encountered before. Their methods of attack are brutal, and they don't leave survivors. It's likely they were after something. Resources, territory, maybe even her. But without more data, it's hard to say. Jake's fist clenched at his side. The thought of anyone hurting Lyra, of her being a target because of something he didn't understand, made his blood boil. But he knew that anger wouldn't help her now. What's next? He asked, his voice firm. She's stable for now, Dr. Harper replied, her gaze steady. We'll continue monitoring her, but we need to prepare for the worst. If those tribal aliens are still out there, we could be looking at more danger. Jake took a deep breath, forcing himself to relax. He couldn't let his emotions control him now. He had a mission to complete, and it was far from over. I'll stay here, Jake said, his eyes locking onto Dr. Harper's. I'm not going anywhere until she's safe. Dr. Harper gave him a small nod. I understand, Commander, but you need to rest. We can't afford to have you running on empty. Jake didn't argue. He knew she was right, but the thought of leaving Lyra alone, even in a medical bay, didn't sit well with him. I'll rest, he said, but it wasn't a promise. It was a brief concession, one that wouldn't last long. Dr. Harper left him standing there, his mind still racing. He couldn't let his guard down, not now. Lyra had come to him for help, and he wasn't going to fail her. As he sat down in the corner of the room, trying to gather his thoughts, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whoever these tribal aliens were, they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. And Jake Miller would do whatever it took to protect Lyra, even if it meant risking his own life. He had no intention of letting her face the darkness alone. The hours passed slowly as Jake sat in the corner of the medical bay, his mind racing. The hum of the machines around him was oddly calming, but it did little to ease the weight on his chest. Lyra was still unconscious, her condition uncertain. He had done what he could to help, but there was only so much a soldier like him could do in a place like this. The medics were doing their best, but every time they came to check on her, Jake could see the concern in their eyes. It was hard to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of his mind, that something more was happening here, something bigger than just a random attack by some alien tribe. As the evening wore on, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Jake looked up as Dr. Harper entered, her expression more serious than usual. Commander Miller, she said, her voice steady but with a hint of exhaustion. How is she? Jake stood, his body stiff from sitting too long. Still the same. I don't think I can just sit here anymore. I need to do something. Dr. Harper gave him a small, understanding nod. I get it, but you need to listen to me for a moment. We've been able to stabilize her for now, but I can't. Promise she'll make it. These burns, they're severe. The damage is extensive. Jake's heart clenched at her words, but he forced himself to stay calm. What are you saying? He asked, his voice low. I'm saying that we need time, Dr. Harper replied. Time to get her the treatment she needs. Time to figure out what we're dealing with. But we don't have much of it. The tribal aliens that attacked her, they're not a typical threat. We've never seen their kind before. Jake clenched his fists. Then we find them. We finish what we started. Dr. Harper met his gaze, her eyes full of both sympathy and understanding. I know you want to help her, but you need to be realistic. We can't go charging after them without more information. We don't know what they're capable of, or if they're still around. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. I can't just sit here and wait. She's in danger, and he stopped himself, taking a deep breath. He knew she was right. They needed a plan. They needed to understand who these tribal aliens were and what they wanted. And Jake, for all his military training, didn't have the resources to take on an unknown enemy alone. He needed more information. You're right, he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. But I'm not leaving her side. Not now, not ever. Dr. Harper's eyes softened. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Commander. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just throw ourselves into danger without knowing what we're up against. Jake nodded, his resolve hardening once again. He would wait, but only for a moment. The tribal aliens had hurt Lyra, and Jake wouldn't rest until he found them. A plan, we go after them. No matter what. Dr. Harper sighed, but there was a glint of respect in her eyes. I don't doubt that you will, Commander. Just be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Jake to his thoughts. As the door closed behind her, Jake's mind once again returned to Lyra. He wouldn't fail her. He couldn't. He wasn't sure what it was about her. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes, or the strength that still shone through even in her weakened state. But Jake knew he had to protect her, whatever it took. The hours stretched on as Jake remained in the medical bay, though every minute felt like an eternity. The uncertainty surrounding Lyra's condition weighed heavily on his shoulders. He had been stationed on many planets, fought many battles, but this felt different. There was something about her, something that told him she wasn't just another mission. She was more than that, and Jake couldn't quite explain why he felt this way. He glanced over at the medical bay's door when he heard footsteps approaching. Dr. Harper stepped in, her face etched with concern. She hadn't been able to hide the strain on her features, but Jake could see the determination behind her eyes. Commander, she began, her voice steady. We've received some initial reports on the tribal aliens. They're more organized than we thought, and they've been a threat in the region for years. It's not just random raids. They're systematically taking out those they deem unworthy. Jake felt a chill run through him. Unworthy, he asked, his voice quiet but firm. They're known to target those they view as weaker, as outsiders, Dr. Harper explained, flipping through a data pad she carried. And based on their previous patterns, we can assume that Lyra was singled out because she's not one of them. She's different. Jake clenched his jaw, frustration building within him. He knew it was pointless to get angry at this point, but it was hard not to. Lyra was more than just a target. She was a person. What's the plan then? He asked, his voice low. Dr. Harper looked up from her pad, her eyes meeting his. We need to gather more intel before we can take any action. We've requested support, and we'll have reinforcements arriving soon. But for now, we need to keep a low profile. If they know we're coming after them, it could complicate things. Jake's resolve hardened. I'm not waiting around for reinforcements. We can't afford to sit here and do nothing while they're out there. Dr. Harper sighed, clearly understanding the frustration in Jake's voice. I know how you feel, Commander. But we can't rush in blindly. We need to know everything we can about them, their tactics, their weaknesses. We can't afford to make mistakes. Jake knew she was right, even if it was hard to admit. He had seen enough battles to understand the importance of proper preparation, but he had never felt so helpless before. The longer they waited, the more Lyra's chances of recovery diminished. As if reading his mind, Dr. Harper continued, Lyra's condition is improving, but it's slow. We're doing what we can to treat her burns, but she's not out of the woods yet. She needs time. Jake nodded, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. He had promised to protect her, and that meant seeing this through, no matter how long it took. He couldn't afford to fail her now. He paced the small room, his mind racing with options. We need a lead, Jake said, more to himself than to Dr. Harper. Something to give us a direction. Dr. Harper raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking? I don't know yet, Jake replied, rubbing his face. But there has to be something we can use. We can't just wait around. Maybe we can find out where they're based, or maybe someone knows something about them. Dr. Harper hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I'll see what I can do. We have a few contacts who might have information, though it's risky. They've been known to hide in plain sight. The tribal aliens operate in small groups, and they've been slipping through our radar for years. Jake knew the risks. He had faced danger before, but this felt different. It wasn't just a matter of survival. It was about doing the right thing. And right now, the right thing was getting to the bottom of this, protecting Lyra, and finding out who these tribal aliens were. I'll take any lead we can get, Jake said, his voice firm. Just make it quick. I'm not sitting here waiting for the next attack. Dr. Harper nodded, then left the room, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He sat down in the chair next to Lyra's bed, watching her closely as the machines continued to monitor her vitals. Her breathing was steady, but Jake knew better than to get his hopes up too soon. He had seen soldiers survive worse injuries, only to succumb to infection or complications. But there was something about Lyra, her strength, her determination, that made him believe she could pull through. He wasn't going to give up on her. Not now. Not ever. The following day, Jake found himself pacing the small room outside Lyra's recovery area. The soft hum of medical equipment surrounded him, but the silence was deafening. Every few minutes, the door to her room would open, and a medic would step out, shaking their head or offering a few brief words of reassurance. But Jake knew better than to take comfort in their hollow promises. Time was running out. He couldn't just sit here. Every fiber of his being told him he needed to act, to do something, anything, to help her. He had to find those tribal aliens. He couldn't let them get away with what they had done. The anger had settled into a cold determination. Lyra needed him, and he wasn't going to fail her. His thoughts were interrupted as the door opened again, and Dr. Harper walked in, her expression serious. "Commander," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We've received some information." Jake's heart quickened, and he stood immediately, his eyes narrowing in anticipation. "What kind of information?" Dr. Harper looked at him for a moment before speaking, her words measured. "I made contact with one of our informants. We've gotten a lead on the tribal aliens. It's not much, but it's something. They've been seen near a small village on the outskirts of the planet's northern region." Jake didn't hesitate. He was already moving toward the door. "That's where we start, then. We need to move out now." Dr. Harper caught his arm before he could leave, her grip surprisingly strong. "Jake, you can't just rush in. The village is miles from here, and the terrain is treacherous. You're not fully recovered, and neither is Lyra. We don't have time for reckless decisions." Jake shook his head, pulling his arm free. "I don't care about me," he said, his voice low but firm. "I care. About her. We don't have time to waste. If we don't act now, we may lose the only chance we have to stop them." Dr. Harper met his gaze, her expression softening with understanding. "I know you want to help, but we need to approach this strategically. We don't know what we're dealing with yet. We need more intel before we can go in guns blazing." Jake clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling to the surface. He didn't want to wait any longer, but he knew she was right. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "What do we know about the village?" Dr. Harper flipped through the data pad she was carrying. "It's a remote settlement, mostly uninhabited now. The locals abandoned it a few months ago after a series of attacks. The tribal aliens seem to be using it as a base of operations. We've had reports of strange activity in the area." Jake's mind raced as he processed the information. "That's our lead. We move in and find out what they're planning." Dr. Harper nodded. "I'll send a team to gather more intel. In the meantime, you need to rest. You won't be any good to anyone if you're running on empty." Jake didn't argue, though every part of him wanted to rush in. He knew Dr. Harper was right. He couldn't afford to burn out before they even had a plan. He nodded stiffly, the fire in his chest still burning but contained. "I'll be ready when the time comes," he said, his voice firm. "I won't let them get away with this." Dr. Harper gave him a small nod. "I know you won't. We'll figure this out together." As she left the room, Jake stood there for a moment, staring at the door. His thoughts were still with Lyra, and he knew that every second they wasted could be the difference between life and death for her. He couldn't afford to wait much longer. The hunt for the tribal aliens had begun, and Jake Miller was ready to lead it. No matter what it took, he would stop them. He had to. For her. His heart raced with the thought of what lay ahead. The path was uncertain, and the danger was real. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had a mission to complete, and nothing would stand in his way. The team assembled quickly, and Jake could feel the intensity building in the air. Dr. Harper had managed to secure a small reconnaissance group, and they were now ready to head toward the village. It was still early morning, and the sun had barely begun to rise over the distant horizon, casting long shadows across the barren terrain. Jake stood at the front, his mind focused, his body ready. He had never been one for waiting, but the days of sitting idle in the medical bay were behind him. The time had come to find those tribal aliens and put an end to their reign of terror. "Commander," Dr. Harper called as she approached him, her voice calm but firm. "The team is prepped and ready. We've mapped out a safe route to the village, but it won't be easy. The terrain is unforgiving, and we still don't know what we're walking into." Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the team. They were a mix of soldiers and scouts, each one trained to handle the unpredictable environment of this alien planet. They were good, but Jake knew they needed more than just skill. They needed determination. "We're not here to waste time," Jake said, his voice low but steady. "We move quickly, get in, gather intel, and get out. We're not engaging unless we have no other choice." The team acknowledged the orders with a series of nods, and they set off. The wind picked up, biting through their layers of clothing as they moved. The landscape around them was harsh: rocky hills, sparse vegetation, and the occasional low outcropping of stone. It felt desolate, the kind of place where a fight could go unnoticed, where the enemy could blend in with the environment. Jake kept his senses sharp, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Every step forward felt like a step deeper into enemy territory. As they approached the village, the first signs of its ruined state became visible. The buildings, once sturdy and vibrant, were now crumbling, with scorch marks on the walls and debris scattered around. It was clear that the village had been abandoned, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. The tribal aliens were clever, hiding in plain sight when they needed to, setting traps where they could. Jake's grip tightened on his weapon as they moved through the wreckage, keeping low, staying out of sight. The village was eerily quiet, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Keep your eyes open," he whispered to the team. "Stay sharp. We don't know what's waiting for us." The team moved cautiously through the wreckage, checking each building, each corner, looking for any signs of activity. Jake could feel the tension rising, each minute that passed adding to the unease in his gut. Then, a sudden movement caught his eye. A figure, just a shadow against the ruins, darted into one of the nearby buildings. Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Stay low," he ordered. The team moved in sync, their training taking over as they followed the movement. They reached the building and checked the entrance. It was dark inside, and the air smelled stale, but there was something off about it. "Stay close," Jake murmured. "We move in fast, and we don't waste time." They entered the building, the creaking of old wood beneath their boots the only sound breaking the silence. The building was empty, no one inside, but there were signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dust, a small fire pit still warm, and scraps of food scattered on the floor. The tribal aliens had been here. They were close. Jake motioned for the team to spread out, their eyes scanning every inch of the room. "They're still here," one of the scouts said quietly, pointing to a set of footprints leading toward the back of the building. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he motioned for them to follow. They moved swiftly, the silence of the building broken only by the sound of their footsteps. As they neared the back room, Jake could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. They were walking into a trap. He could feel it in his bones. But there was no turning back now. They had come this far. The door to the back room creaked open, and Jake's eyes scanned the space inside. Empty. But something wasn't right. His instincts were screaming at him. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter. The tribal aliens had been waiting, and now, the real fight was about to begin. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening thud, and Jake's heart raced. The sound of laughter echoed from all corners of the room, low and menacing. The tribal aliens had set the trap, and now they were cornered. The room, once a forgotten storage space, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in on them. Jake's mind raced. He could feel the tension building in his chest, his senses heightened as he scanned the dimly lit room. He motioned for the team to stay low, their eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. The laughter grew louder, almost mocking, as if the aliens were enjoying their game. Jake's grip tightened on his weapon. "Stay calm," he whispered, his voice steady but full of determination. "We move fast, we move smart. Don't engage unless we have no choice." The team nodded, their eyes focused on Jake as they tightened their formation. They had trained for moments like this, but no amount of preparation could make this situation feel any less dangerous. "What do we do now?" one of the scouts asked, his voice barely audible. Jake's mind worked quickly, processing the situation. They couldn't let their emotions control them. They had to think, plan, and act with precision. "We wait," Jake said quietly. "They want us to make a move. We won't give them the satisfaction." The sound of footsteps echoed from behind, and Jake's body went rigid. The aliens were closing in. He could feel the weight of their presence, as if they were circling the room like predators. He motioned for the team to spread out, keeping their backs to the walls, using the shadows for cover. The silence that followed was deafening. Every breath felt louder than the last, every movement amplified in the stillness. Jake's eyes scanned the room, looking for any sign of the enemy. Then, Without warning, a figure emerged from the darkness. A tall alien, its skin a dark green, with sharp features and glowing red eyes. The tribal alien stood at the entrance, a cruel smile spreading across its face as it looked directly at Jake. "You think you can just waltz in here and take what's ours?" the alien hissed. Jake's heart beat faster, his pulse quickening. The words stung, but he knew they were a distraction, a way to get under his skin. He took a deep breath, his focus sharpening. "I'm not here for your territory," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to stop you from hurting anyone else." The alien laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent a chill down Jake's spine. "You're too late. This planet is ours now." Jake's mind worked quickly, analyzing the situation. The alien was baiting them, trying to provoke a reaction. But Jake wasn't going to take the bait. Not yet. He glanced at his team, signaling for them to remain quiet, remain patient. Then, the door behind him creaked open. Another alien entered, this one smaller, but just as dangerous, its eyes gleaming with malice. It was surrounded by others, their forms barely visible in the shadows. Jake's eyes narrowed. He wasn't about to let this escalate into a full-scale battle. Not yet. "This ends today," Jake said, his voice low but filled with resolve. The tribal alien smile faded, and for a moment, the room fell into a tense silence. Jake could feel the weight of the moment. The battle for survival wasn't just about physical strength. It was about control, about strategy. And Jake wasn't about to lose control. "You don't belong here," the alien said, its tone shifting. "This planet will be ours, whether you live or die." Jake's grip on his weapon tightened, and he could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had made a promise to protect Lyra, and now he was going to keep that promise. "Then it's time to remind you who's in charge," Jake said, his voice steady, unwavering. The time for waiting was over. The trap had been set, and now it was their turn to strike. He motioned for his team to move, their movements quick and calculated. They were ready. The tribal aliens had underestimated them. And now, Jake Miller would show them exactly what happened when you underestimated humanity. The air in the room was thick with tension as Jake and his team stood ready, their weapons poised. The tribal aliens had spread out, their eyes glowing in the dim light, surrounding them from all sides. Jake's heart beat steadily in his chest, his mind laser-focused. He couldn't afford any mistakes. Every move counted. "Move in," Jake ordered, his voice low and commanding. The team sprang into action, moving quickly and with purpose, their boots barely making a sound on the cold, hard floor. They had one chance to end this before the situation got any worse. The tribal aliens, once confident, now hesitated, their eyes shifting nervously, as they realized the humans weren't backing down. But it was too late. Jake's team moved as one, sweeping through the room with precision. They didn't need to engage in a fight, at least not yet. They needed answers. As Jake advanced, he kept his eyes locked on the nearest alien, watching for any sign of aggression. The creature growled, but didn't move. Jake didn't give it a second thought. He'd learned long ago that hesitation in moments like these could cost lives. The alien tribes, he had learned, didn't fight fairly. They played dirty, striking without warning, attacking the weak, the vulnerable. But Jake and his team weren't the weak ones here. They were the hunters. "We need intel," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. The tribal aliens stared at him in silence, their eyes filled with hatred, but they said nothing. Jake motioned to one of his soldiers, a young man named Marcus, to approach the nearest alien. Marcus was quick, his hand steady as he gripped the alien's arm, pulling it away from the shadows. "Tell us where the others are," Jake demanded, his tone unwavering. The alien's lips curled into a sneer, but it said nothing. Jake's patience was running thin. "I don't have time for games," he growled. "Where are the others? Where is your leader?" The alien spat at him, its saliva hitting the floor with a sickening sound. Jake didn't flinch. He'd been spat on, punched, and worse. But this wasn't going to stop him. He wasn't here to play by their rules. "You're wasting your time," the alien finally said, its voice low but filled with venom. "You'll never defeat us. The tribes will rise. We'll take over everything." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Not if I can help it." He motioned to his team again, signaling for them to move. They didn't have all day. Time was ticking, and every moment wasted meant Lyra's condition would worsen. As the team pressed forward, Jake kept his focus on the leader of the tribe. The alien's words stung, but Jake knew better than to let them distract him. He had a mission, and that mission was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The tribal aliens had their plans, but so did Jake. He wasn't going to let them succeed. Not now. Not ever. We're going to stop you, Jake said firmly, his gaze cold as he stood tall in front of the alien. You'll regret underestimating us. The alien said nothing, its eyes burning with defiance, but it knew, deep down, that Jake was right. They had underestimated humanity. They had no idea what they were up against. Jake and his team weren't just soldiers. They were the embodiment of determination, of resilience. And they were going to win. Slowly, methodically, Jake and his team gathered the intel they needed, pressing the remaining tribal aliens for answers. They weren't going to let these monsters keep terrorizing the innocent. Not as long as Jake was still breathing. When they were finished, Jake turned to his team, his voice low but filled with authority. We've got what we need, he said. It's time to finish this. His words were clear. The battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But they were one step closer to ending the reign of terror these tribal aliens had imposed on this planet. And Jake was going to make sure they didn't get away with it. He wasn't just fighting for the mission anymore. He was fighting for Lyra. He was fighting for everyone who had been hurt by these monsters. And nothing was going to stand in his way.